March 24th, 1945, 22,000 FT above the German countryside near Castle, Oberleutnant Franz Stigler sat in the cockpit of his Messerschmitt Bf-1, staring at the empty fuel gauge and knowing he was about to die. His engine sputtered, choking on fumes that no longer existed. Below him stretched nearly 50 m of enemy-held territory. Behind him, his airfield was out of reach. All around him, the sky belonged to American fighters. His hands shook on the controls, not from the cold, though the air was brutally frigid at that altitude, but from the certainty of what came next. He had heard the stories. American pilots didn't just shoot you down. They circled your parachute, waiting to finish the job. They strafed you as you hung helpless, or they waited until you landed, then turned you into target practice. They were animals, his commander had said. Franz believed it. They all did because that's what they were told. He glanced at the patchwork of farmland and villages below, each one crawling with Allied troops, tanks and anti-aircraft units. The Americans had been pushing across Europe for months. Their fury was earned. He had no illusions. If they caught him, they had every reason to hate him. The Bf-109 choked again, then went quiet. The propeller began to spin uselessly in the wind. He was gliding now. No power, no thrust, just wings, air and gravity. With each second, the ground grew closer. In the distance, he spotted a captured Luftwaffe airfield now repurposed by the Americans. Rows of aircraft, military vehicles. There might be a runway, but even if he landed, even if he survived the descent, what then? Capture, interrogation, maybe worse. His mind flashed to his mother and younger sister in Bavaria. If he didn't make it, they would get a telegram missing in action. No details, no closure. They would never know if he burned alive or was shot out of the sky. Then movement. His rear-view mirror showed two specks growing larger by the second. Silver fast Mustangs, P-51s, American fighters, the best in the skies. Franz's stomach turned to ice. They'd spotted him and now they were coming. He didn't reach for the trigger. There was no point. He was defenseless. He braced himself, hoping for a quick death, but it didn't come. Instead, one of the Mustangs pulled up beside him. Close, too close, barely 50 feet off his wing. Franz turned his head. Through the canopy he saw the pilot clearly. American, young, maybe his age. The pilot looked straight at him. No hate, no trigger pull, just watching. Then the American did something completely unexpected. He pointed downward, not in anger, not to intimidate, more like a gesture of direction, of help. Franz blinked. Was this a trick? Was he mocking him before finishing the kill? But then the second Mustang pulled up on the other side, boxed in. Both Americans flanking him, but not firing. His Bf-109 continued to drop. 18,000 FD now. No power, no choice. The lead Mustang pointed again, this time more firmly toward the airfield. Then he made another gesture, palms down, slow push. Land. Franz couldn't believe what was happening. These Americans, his sworn enemies, were guiding him down. He hadn't trained for this. No one had. The stories hadn't mentioned compassion. At 15,000, the airfield loomed large. It was real. Runways visible, American crews moving below. He knew what waited if he landed. Prison, maybe worse. Every film, every speech, every warning had said it was better to die than surrender to Americans. But his engine was dead. His options were gone. 10,000 FT. The Mustang still flanked him. No shots fired. No threats. Just silent escorts. 8,000. 5,000. Franz's gloves were soaked with sweat. His heart hammered. Still nothing. At 3,000 FD, the lead Mustang rocked its wings. A signal. Then it peeled off. The second followed, leaving him alone with the runway. Somehow they had given him a chance. He lowered the gear manually. No hydraulics left. The landing would be hard. But he was alive, and someone somewhere had just chosen mercy. Bronze Messerschmitt slammed onto the American runway, bouncing once before settling into a long, powerless roll. With no engine and no brakes, he watched helplessly as the aircraft skidded across the concrete, finally lurching to a stop at the far end. Silence followed, thick and unreal. He sat frozen in the cockpit, heart racing, gloved hands still clutching the stick. Then he saw the jeeps, American military vehicles, racing toward him. This was it, the moment he had dreaded: capture, humiliation. Maybe worse. He considered drawing his pistol, a final act, a soldier's death. But then he thought of those Mustangs, of the pilot who had looked him in the eye and given him the gift of landing. Of maybe not today. He raised his hands slowly, deliberately. The canopy creaked open. The first American to reach him was a sergeant, sidearm drawn, but not aimed. Out, the man barked. Then, in broken German, roused Lamb France obeyed, legs trembling. He stepped down from the cockpit. He expected shouting, shoving a rifle to the back. But instead, the sergeant reached out, steadying him. Easy there, buddy. You okay, Verlietz? The question stunned him. Was the man checking if he was injured? With genuine concern? 9, France managed. Not injured, the sergeant nodded. Good, come on. He was led to a jeep, not dragged, not shoved, just led. One soldier sat beside him, another across. No one pointed a weapon at him. No one struck him. The vehicle smelled of cigarettes and army coffee. A soldier next to him offered a canteen. France hesitated, then drank. Fold, clean. His flight suit was soaked with sweat, frozen stiff. An officer awaited him. A captain, mid-40s, glasses, polite. Captain James Mitchell, he said in perfect German. Sit, please. Fron looked at the chair. Not a cold interrogation seat, a cushioned office chair. On the desk, coffee, and next to it, 2 cubes of real sugar. Would you like some? Mitchell asked, already pouring. France could only nod. The warmth of the mug seared his fingertips. The aroma hit like a memory, childhood mornings before the war. He took a sip. It burned his tongue. He didn't care. It was the best thing he'd tasted in years. You met some of our better pilots today, Mitchell said, sitting down across from him. Captain Joe Henderson and Lieutenant Charlie Brennan, 357th Fighter Group. They saw your engine was out. Figured you might prefer to live through the day. Bryn stared into the coffee. His voice was barely a whisper. Why didn't they shoot me? Mitchell seemed confused by the question. Because you were defenseless. What kind of men do you think we are? France had no answer. Everything he'd been told about the barbarity of Americans, their cruelty to prisoners, the horror of capture was being unravelled sip by sip. After the interview, he was brought to the P quarters, not a cage, not a cell, a converted barracks building with bunks and blankets, a working stove. 12 other German airmen, all recently captured, all looking just as stunned as he felt. A medic arrived. American, professional, he examined Fran's hands. Frostbite, the interpreter said. We'll get that treated. France insisted he was fine. The medic treated him anyway. Bandages, cream, a wool blanket. Then came the food. An American K ration, canned meat, crackers, chocolate cigarettes. The chocolate made him tear up. It tasted like peace. That night he couldn't sleep. His mind circled the same question over and over. Why the mercy? Why the kindness? Why were his enemies offering him more care and dignity than his own command had in years? It was not weakness. These were the victors. The strong. They had chosen restraint when they didn't have to. It shook him to his core. The days that followed were unlike anything France Stigler had imagined possible in captivity. At the temporary P camp he was treated not as a beaten enemy, but as a man who had simply lost a war. The barracks were basic, but warm. Meals were regular. Medical care continued without question. Even the guards, those young Americans with rifles slung casually across their shoulders, behaved more like watchful neighbors than jailers. There were rules, certainly, but they were enforced with professionalism, not cruelty. It was surreal. One guard, a teenager from Nebraska named Tommy, struck up a conversation with France. In broken English and German, they exchanged slang and curses, laughing over mispronunciations. For the first time in years, Fron laughed freely. On one evening, swing music drifted through the camp from a radio. Glenn Miller. Fron found himself tapping his foot, the rhythm unlocking memories long buried. A guard noticed. You like swing? He asked, surprised. Fron nodded. Before war, I loved it. The next day, the same guard brought a record player and a few old 78s. Benny Goodman, Duke Ellington, Artie Shaw. He set it up in the common room and let the German prisoners listen. That night, former enemies sat side by side, bobbing their heads in unison. For a few hours, the war outside felt distant, overwritten by the sound of brass and rhythm, by the reminder that music didn't care what flag you flew. The humane treatment extended beyond comfort. One of the other German pilots, Vera, had taken a bullet to the leg during capture. France watched as American medics treated him with care. Surgery, bandages, antibiotics. Serra survived. He walked again. In a Luftwaffe camp, he might have lost the leg, maybe his life. But here his captors acted like his well-being mattered. It shook the foundations of every story they believed. The Red Cross visited regularly, bringing parcels with chocolate, soap, and letters from home. The Americans allowed them to write back. Censored, yes, but allowed. France's letter to his mother was short. I'm alive. I am safe. The Americans have treated me well. Don't believe everything you've heard. 3 weeks after his capture, a familiar face appeared at the barracks door. Captain Joe Henderson, the Mustang pilot who had guided France down. He brought soup in a thermos and a pack of cigarettes. Thought you might be hungry, he said through an interpreter. Fran stood speechless. Henderson smiled. That was some fine flying. By the way. Dead stick landing in a 109 on an unfamiliar runway. I've seen worse from our guys. France could barely respond. They had tried to kill each other. And now Henderson was complimenting him. Sharing soup, sharing warmth. He pulled a photo from his wallet. A woman and 2 small children. My wife Betty. Oh. Donna is 5. Joe Jr. just turned 3. Fran nodded. I have a sister, a mother. Henderson nodded back. Then they'll be glad to know you made it. Before leaving, Henderson turned serious. I know what they told you about us, he said. That we torture, that we hate, but that's not who we are. You're going to be treated by the rules. Geneva Convention medical care male. And when this war ends, and it will end, you'll go home. These men didn't act humanely because they were soft. They did it because they were strong enough to choose dignity. Their discipline wasn't just military, it was moral. Later that night, France wrote in his diary, they treat us not as monsters, not as enemies, but as men. Today, I saw what honor looks like in a uniform not my own. France Stigler's life didn't end on that runway in March 1945. It restarted after 3 weeks in American custody. He was transferred to a longer-term P camp, eventually repatriated to Germany in August 1945. His home was a shell of what it had been. The house half destroyed, his town reduced to rubble. His father had died on the Eastern Front, but his mother and sister had survived. France returned not as the man who had left, but as someone permanently altered by what he had seen, not in combat, but in capture. He trained as a commercial pilot in the 1950s, flying for Lufthansa as Germany rebuilt. But no matter how many miles he flew, part of him remained at 22,000 fads, suspended between death and a choice made by an enemy who had every right to kill, but didn't. In the decades that followed, France searched tirelessly for the P-51 pilot who had spared him. He wrote to veterans organizations, sent inquiries across oceans. Finally, in 1989, a letter reached him in Canada where France had immigrated and built a new life as a businessman. The sender, Captain Joe Henderson. They spoke, arranged to meet, and in an airport terminal 44 years after that fateful flight, 2 old men embraced, enemies once, now bonded forever by one moment of decency in the middle of a war that had tried to strip men of it. Thank you, Fran whispered. You gave me my life. Henderson, ever modest, replied simply. It was the right thing to do. Their friendship endured. They exchanged family photos, visited each other's homes, told their story to schools, veterans groups, historians. They didn't share it to glorify war, but to remind others what humanity looked like when it refused to die in the face of cruelty. France's diary from 1945 is now archived in Germany. One entry stands out. Today I learned that strength is not in domination but in mercy. That honor lives not in flags but in choices. He repeated that line often in speeches. It became a mantra. France wasn't alone. Thousands of German PS returned home with similar stories. Fair treatment, medical care, food, male music. They saw the difference firsthand between the propaganda they'd been fed and the reality of American values. They became quiet ambassadors for democracy in post-war Europe. America's treatment of its prisoners was not an accident. It was doctrine. From Eisenhower down, the message was clear. Honor the Geneva Convention. Not because others do, but because we do. It wasn't just morality. It was strategy. Every humane interaction planted a seed. Seeds that would grow into alliances, partnerships, and eventually peace. By 1946, America was already thinking beyond victory. Lisa, the Marshall Plan, NATO, a united West against Soviet expansion. None of that would have worked without trust, and trust wasn't built in conferences. It was built in barracks, in chow lines, in hospital tents, where an American guard handed a cigarette to a German pilot, where a nurse sat with a wounded enemy and kept him company through the night, where a Mustang pilot saw a dying aircraft and chose to guide it home rather than blow it from the sky. These were not isolated acts of kindness, they were the building blocks of post-war order. France died in 2008, but his story lives on. His grandson became a German Air Force pilot. He flies in NATO missions now wing to wing with American pilots. The legacy of a choice made in 1945, a choice to see not an enemy, but a man. A reminder that how you treat the defeated defines the future. And sometimes the truest victories don't come from bullets, but from mercy. Do you have a World War II story in your family of enemies showing unexpected humanity? Share it in the comments below. These stories matter. They remind us of what's possible. And if this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe, and help us share more forgotten moments of courage and compassion.